having an issue with the old wildlife truck. I don't know if you could tell how rough it was running, but it's got a pretty bad misfire. I was out of town about 2.5 hours away from home when out of nowhere it just started running rough. I wasn't towing, there was no weird sound, nothing to indicate what happened, and the check engine light flash started flashing, which indicates that there's a misfire, and it was very noticeable. I had very low power. I was going to my hometown to pick up my dad to take him to a doctor's appointment, and luckily I was not too far from a buddy's house. I went over there and we put it on the scanner, figured out which cylinders were misfiring. It had 4 misfire codes, 3 cylinders and 1 random. I had just put on MSD coils about 3,000 or 4,000 miles ago, so I thought 1 or more were bad, although I thought it was odd that more than 1 would go out all at once. Swapped in some coils, that made no change. Limped it over to my dad's place and parked it. I came back to do some diagnosing with some tools and ran a compression test and discovered cylinder number 2 has 0 compression. This thing has the 6.2 gas so-called Boss V8, which is known to be a pretty reliable motor, but the one Achilles heel that they seem to have is broken valve springs. I'm told that it's rare and usually doesn't happen, but when it does, 2 things can happen. 1, the valve will drop into the combustion chamber and completely destroy the motor. 2, what I think has happened here, the valve spring breaks, but doesn't drop the valve, but leaves it open just enough that it has no compression and it causes a misfire. That's what I'm hoping it is. It could be something random that's not known for the Boss V8, but I guess we'll find out. That is the plan, is to pull a valve cover off today and see if we can make a visual inspection on the valve springs. In order to get this thing back, I left it there and I took my dad's truck back up here. I ended up renting a truck from Enterprise, 3500 Duramax diesel, very nice truck, and took this thing back after it was sitting for a week. In the meantime, I ordered a couple of tools to get the job done, just in case it is a valve spring. This is the valve spring compressor, OTC 4573. I got one of these cheap articulating borescopes off Amazon. That way I can look into the cylinder and see if there's any damage. Now, you need to do 2 things, one of 2 things, in order to make sure the valve doesn't drop into the combustion chamber while you're changing out the spring. First, using this is a good way to determine if the piston's at the top of its stroke. You want that so if the valve does drop, it doesn't go all the way in there and you might be able to retrieve it. Otherwise, you want to pump air into the cylinder to push the valve up and hold it in place. You can do that 2 ways. This is a compression kit, and you can pull out the valve core and just pump air in there continuously. You should also be able to use a cylinder leak down kit. This is OTC 5609. These are the specialty tools I think I should need. I don't think I should need anything else other than normal hand tools. Now my cylinder 2 misfire is over here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The other misfire cylinders had good compression. I assume it just had something to do with timing. So this valve cover doesn't look too bad to remove. I did not look at a shop manual or procedure or how to do this. I'm just going to kind of wing it. We have some coolant hoses here, wiring harness, wires. I think I'm just going to start disconnecting things. I believe that there's a series of 8mm bolts to hold this on. And we're just going to pull that off and see if it's broken. And if it's broken, we'll go ahead and order the parts we need. The valve spring, the seat, and probably the keepers at the very least, and a gasket. I decided to drain some of the coolant so I could pull these coolant hoses off and out of the way, and it wouldn't make a mess up here. Ended up making a mess down here. On the bottom corner, there's a drain tube. You can use a 19mm bolt, it's plastic, a 19mm wrench to loosen it, and there's a tube that goes out. You can stick a piece of hose on there, which I didn't. And it made a mess because I forgot to release the pressure. So if you're gonna do that, take the cap off first. Otherwise, you'll end up making a mess like I did. Next to come off is this upper intake. These hoses will pull off the wiring and get everything out of the way. Didn't quite get enough out. That's why you want to drain at least a gallon. I spilled so much I thought I had about that, but trying to avoid getting anything into where the plug goes. I did disconnect the battery just to be safe. Anytime you're working on your motor, even though this is not the electrical system necessarily, you're close to the alternator. It's a good idea just to disconnect the ground or negative cable. Put some caps on these coolant ports, these pipes, just to keep anything from coming out or back in. These aren't necessary if you drain the fluid, the coolant enough, which I didn't do. Now that this is sort of cleaned up, we can start disconnecting our plugs, get them out of the way. Disconnect this, I believe, is the camshaft position sensor. That needs to come out of the way. There should be 10 8mm bolts. Some of them are difficult to get to. I have removed the wheel well liner. You can see how much access is in there. I also wanted to put this light here. Should be much easier to do that. It's held in by 3 of these washer kind of bolts. They're 8mm. 2 of these 8mm. They go straight up here. This little clip, and then a handful of these 5.5mm. They go in here. And this thing just, you can bend it and it pops right out. Now I'll pull off these plugs, the wires, and go for the bolts, and then I'll bring it back when I can pull this cover off and find out if that valve spring is broken. I've got pretty much everything disconnected and loose. For the valve cover bolts, they're 8mm, and there's 5 on top and 5 on the bottom. Removing the wheel well liner does help. Having a ratchet like this helps. This is a wobble extension, that's nice to have, and 3/8 is really what you need. Or excuse me, 1/4 is what you need. This is a 3/8 ratchet, so I have a reducer. A 1/4 ratchet, electric ratchet, would be much better. Getting yourself some trim tools, trim removal tools is good. Pretty much everything on the wiring harness is held in by these clips. Right there. The spark plug wires are held in by clips on the valve cover. So it's good to remove everything and get this harness loose and up and out of the way. Now I've got the bolts undone. They stay in the valve cover, and I have not pulled this off yet, so I'm bringing you in here so you can see for the first time, if I can get this on here, what it looks like. There's a PCV valve right here as well. That just, you pull the gray clip there and it pops off. Twist it out of the way. And we should have enough clearance to get this thing okay. We're off on the top. Looks like we're stuck on the bottom somewhere. Yeah, we definitely had to remove that coolant pipe, or the two coolant pipes here, to get this off. It took me a while to find it, but the exhaust valve spring is broken. Let me get a better light and the zoom lens, and I'll take you in there and you can see what it looks like. So this is actually good news, I guess. It could have been something major wrong. A valve spring shouldn't be too bad to replace. We have to pull these rocker shafts off, rocker arms. I was hoping it'd be an intake valve because they're more accessible. It looks like it's probably going to be the worst one to get. Thanks to this dipstick tube, we're probably gonna have to remove that. It is Sunday and the Ford dealership is closed. There are 2 or 3 within a 30 or 40 minute drive from here. So I'm sure somebody somewhere tomorrow will have one in stock. These are the parts that I have. All of this cost about $75 after tax. You can find all this stuff online, genuine Ford parts, for cheaper, but I wanted to buy it locally. So this valve spring was $14, but they're usually 10 bucks online, so you know, it really doesn't matter. It's cheap enough. One thing to mention, my truck is a 2015, and there is a different part number, at least for the exhaust valve, on trucks built before May 2015. Mine was built June 2014, so it's got this part number here. So you may want to call in your local Ford dealer with your VIN for the best way to find out. This valve cover gasket was 40 bucks. That was the most expensive. I picked up a valve seal. I don't know why it didn't come in a package. I got the so-called keepers, or what they call collets. That's to keep the valve in. And a new, what do they call that, a hat? A retainer. All these parts are really cheap, so may as well get them brand new while you're there, just in case. Now these collets or retainers, you can pull them out with one of these magnets. Telescoping magnet is fine. But to put them back in, you can use this, or I've got some of these, I don't know what they're called, forceps. Hopefully that will help. Now as far as holding the piston up, I had mentioned using a compression tester or leak down tester. But one method that I've never used that I'm thinking of trying is stuffing rope in the cylinder. This is paracord. That should work. The reason being that while this broken valve spring is not supposed to be common, you know, it happened to me. And now I'm kind of worried next time I go on a long trip, is it going to break on me again? I think the chances of that are unlikely, but these are so cheap, these parts, it's not a bad idea to keep them in the toolbox and to keep your valve tool. You could theoretically do this on the side of the road or a parking lot. If you're, you know, a couple hundred miles from home and it's a Sunday, it'd take a couple hours, but you could theoretically do it. And I don't have compressed air on the road, but I can bring this rope. So the way to do this, from what I understand, is you turn the motor by hand so the piston's all the way at the top. And I think you're supposed to lower it a little bit, feed all this rope in, and then by hand, not by the key, but by hand, turn it so it compresses all the way up. And that should keep the valve up. So I've got this articulating borescope that I'm gonna stick in the cylinder wall to see if there's any damage in there and to kind of see where the piston is in its stroke. I think this would be a quick and easy way to do that. I've been wanting one of these for a while, but I'm kind of too cheap to buy it. I think this was $100, give or take, so not expensive, but I needed a reason to buy it, and now I have it. So let's stick this in there, pull the plug, stick this in there, and turn the motor over by hand, see what we see. I'm under the truck right now putting a socket on the crank, and this fan shroud is kind of in the way. But if you look right there, you can see these tabs right there. You push those in. There's 4 of them, I think, and you can push the shroud in. And then you can put a socket on that crank, which I think is 21 millimeters. Another way to determine top dead center is you can put a screwdriver or something in there. A real long one, that one's not long enough. Takes some getting used to with this thing. There's the valve stuck open. You can see right there. Let's better look at it. This is a handy little tool. I'll put a link to this in the description if you're interested. There's tons of different ones like this though. They're probably all made by the same sort of factory. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty low in the stroke. Let's go ahead and turn the crank some and see what we can get. That borescope line was long enough that I could fish the monitor down while I was turning the crank. Alright, if you're going to do the rope method, don't use thin paracord. Get much thicker nylon rope. This just keeps bunching up. Much thicker nylon rope would go in there much easier. Time to pull the rocker shafts. These are 10 millimeter. I think the proper way is to work from outer to inner to loosen it, and from inner to outer when you tighten it. Now I'm abandoning the rope method. This rope that I have is just too thin, and it keeps, you know, twisting and crinkling rather than going straight down in. So if you have a much thicker nylon rope, that's the way to go. I have chosen to go with the compression tester kit. I've removed the valve's core there, just using one of these tools, just like you would for a tire valve. I've already got the piston at top dead center using the borescope. I'm gonna thread this in there, put some air on it, and then we will use this tool to compress whatever valve is left and put the old one in. You want to thread this in the spark plug hole first and then connect your air. Otherwise, it's just going to keep blowing air, and it's too difficult to get in. I was fighting with this for quite a while because the keepers were stuck to the top of the valve. Eventually I just tapped it a couple times with the ratchet to knock them loose, and you could see them start to spin when you spun the broken valve spring. See part of the valve guide. That's why it's important to get another one. Got some oil on this to lubricate it going in. It's in. See how difficult that was when these collets were seized to the top of the valve? Do yourself a favor when if you have to do this, tap the top a couple of times. I used a ratchet and that released it. I went through 3 or 4 different valve spring tools thinking I couldn't get it, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I thought I had a bent valve. But that's what the problem was. It was just stuck. Otherwise, it's not a bad job. These are oil passages here, so put something in there to block it. You can see how easy it is for these collets or keepers to fall in. A combination of a magnet and these curved forceps. These are cheap ones off Amazon for $5 or $6. That seemed to help. Just take your time and be careful. Next, to put these rocker shafts and rocker arms in, the 10mm bolts are torqued down in 3 sequences. First is to 89 inch-pounds, then 177 inch-pounds, and then you turn 60 degrees for the final torque. Start from the inners and work your way out. got all this torque down. Be sure to get a decent inch-pound torque wrench. The next thing to do is scrape off this old RTV where the cover meets the head. Put some new RTV there, and then put the valve cover gasket on and just reassemble everything. It's a good idea to rotate this by hand just to verify nothing's bound up in here. Everything seems to be working properly, so I'm gonna scrape this off, put some RTV on, and get this stuff back together. For that spot up where the head meets the cover, I thought I had the right stuff, which is an excellent gasket maker. I guess I ordered just regular ultra black. This will work just fine. So put those on. I don't know what the torque specs are on these valve cover bolts are. I gotta look them up, but something tells me it might just be good and tight. And call it a day. I've got pretty much everything back together up here, except for the wheel well. And I think I might be missing a plug somewhere at the back of the valve cover. I thought I remembered taking one off, but I couldn't feel it, I couldn't see it. I stuck my phone back there and couldn't find it on video. So I expect there to be a potential problem there. I've decided to pull out a fuel pump fuse and crank. On this, you crank it and you can let go, and it's an automatic crank. Sort of like a push button, but it'll crank for I think 10 seconds and it'll stop. You don't have to sit there and hold it like a normal car. I'm gonna do that and see if I can hear any weird sounds. I got distracted when I was doing the rocker shafts, and I may or may not have done the final torque sequence wrong on one of the bolts. That sounds normal. Let's try it again. I don't hear anything abnormal. Let's put the fuel pump fuse in and give it a try. All right, I'm gonna call that fixed. Still gotta test drive it and put everything else back together, the wheel liner. Put a little too much coolant in there. I'm gonna have to check that. Just use Dexcool for this. And if you get the concentrated stuff, make sure you mix it with distilled water. Do not use tap water. Now, when I was out of town and I was driving this thing on the highway, there were no indications of what happened. And as I mentioned earlier, the valve sometimes drops into the combustion chamber and destroys the engine. And I'm wondering, when I had to tap on the end to release these collets, or keepers, I'm wondering if that's what held the valve up. And that may have saved the motor. Because I was out of town, away from the shop and the tools, near my dad's house, he told me I should take it to his mechanic. So I had it towed over there, and I did my diagnosing. I determined what I thought it was, and I told him. He told me my motor needed to be replaced. He was going to charge me over $7,000 to put a used motor in this truck, and he did nothing that I asked him to. So it is worth doing your own diagnosis. You know, that that was $75 worth of parts, plus a few tools. But really, you could do this in an afternoon if you've got everything ready. This borescope is not necessary, but it was a very handy little tool. These are some of the tools I bought. I had such a hard time getting this on because the keepers were kind of seized on there. I tried this tool from Duralast because you can put a socket on it. I thought that was handy. Then I tried this tool from Lyle, which is a nice tool, but there's just not enough room. But because I was so close to the shock tower and the dipstick tubes, there's just wasn't enough room in here, even using this bolt. Definitely need a magnet to pull the keepers out. And this little forcep, again, I think it was $5 or $6. That was a handy little piece to have. And ultimately, I ended up just using the air to keep the valve in place. And that was the way to go. I wanted to try this method just so I could keep it on the road, but you need a much thicker nylon. This just coils up on itself and you can't get it in the hole. You can see how that valve breaks, that valve spring. These are so cheap, these parts here, you may as well just buy them. You know, this little spring came off the valve seat. You could probably replace that, but that's rubber right there. And that's really hard. So replacing that while you're in there, and then the retainer on the top, you know, it makes sense to do it. Plus, these things can get dropped down into the engine bay, or hopefully not your motor, and you can never find them. So I don't know what these cost. They were like $1 for the two. So definitely worth buying these spare parts. Overall, this job was not very difficult. It was kind of a pain to get that the stuck keeper, and I wasn't sure what I was doing, and I wasted a lot of time getting these extra tools. All you gotta do is just tap it, and that released it. Aside from that, the job really wasn't difficult, and I think anyone with these basic tools and even a few extras could do this at home. If you have a 6.2 gas truck and you get a misfire and no or low compression on one of the cylinders, you know, it might be worth looking into a valve. But don't let someone try and replace an entire motor. That's unnecessary. I'm gonna put about 500 miles on this truck before I do any towing around town to and from work and the store and so on. And once that's done, I'm just gonna send it because the rest of the motor seems okay. If the motor blows up in 5 miles, I'll come back and let you know.